Okay, Doubts Aloud listeners, this is the September podcast, and it is not going to be just me today because Ed and Francis are back as promised. And how are you two?
Great. And Andrew, thank you so much. You did a fantastic job with those two.
Yes, loved it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we couldn't meet up and reschedule either very, very easily. So to me, it was one of the most obvious things to do. And rather than do classically what some podcasts do, which is to play an old one, and just do that, it was really to take up that first idea from your suggestion, Ed, of the first episode, which was an interview for about half an hour or something of me with my journey, faith or out of faith journey, and just completely redo it in detail, which in the end I realized was going to make for two podcasts. So I really did enjoy doing it, and enjoy sort of that progression from very, very young age to where I am now and doing the podcast. So it was real fun to do.
Yeah. And I think you're the ideal person because, well, speaking for myself, it was only when I was losing my faith that I started taking seriously the more rational side of things. Whereas for you were treating it really seriously right the way through.
And I suppose, is there anything, Francis, that you found new that I haven't even mentioned in our time together doing this podcast?
What I found really interesting was the extent to which the resurrection accounts played such a large part in you. I mean, I think it was actually pretty much the last straw that broke the camel's back. I don't know if you'd agree with that, because I do find that with so many Christians, for them the resurrection is like the huge plus point and the one thing that enables them, even if they've got doubts in other areas, the one thing that they find that they can nail their faith to the sticking point with is what they see as the strength of the evidence for the resurrection. So you will frequently find them saying, oh, well, okay, there are problems, but when you come down to it, there's the resurrection. Explain that away. You can't. Something happened and you cannot explain it. And to me, I've always felt this. I've always felt that the resurrection was a bug, not a feature. And yet, obviously, there are so many Christians for whom, honestly and sincerely, they really believe that this is like the thing. This is their strongest point, their big argument. And I found it really interesting that you saw it when you went into it, as I see it, that it's a mess, it's a problem.
Yeah, I found that for me in my story, it really was like like I did in the actual episode, was the end point. It was like looking at the resurrection. Right, if none of this other stuff is working out and all these other things are sort of falling to the wayside with problems and issues, I had realized that I had just accepted the resurrection on just being told. I didn't research it. I wasn't like the guy who wrote Who Moved the Stone and thought, wow, there's no other option. I just sort of believed it. And that's what happens in the faith. You kind of believe in the resurrection, believe the Lord crucified and died for your sins and all the rest of it. And then when I did look into it at that final point, yeah, it did. It suddenly came up with these, oh gosh, that now I can look at it from a different angle. That looks a bit weird. Doubting tradition, all these other aspects I mentioned. And then suddenly I realized it wasn't something that I was building everything around. It was like, oh, it looks like a secular view of this would understand it this way. He died by the Romans. Their Messiah, who they thought the Messiah had died, and then some of them perhaps thought they'd seen him afterwards. Well, that's not unrealistic to what happens in the real world that we know, and then other people then easily believe, did you see the statue crying? Well, no. And then before you know it, yes. So, particularly that doubting thing on the mountain, that really did throw me. You're saying, hang around, let's just get this right. 12 people, if it was, that's the amount they're talking about, went to see him, and you can just imagine it, that's Jesus over there, and the other 4 disciples going, don't know. That's just so bizarre to me, or maybe it was a wider group, but either way, that points out right there something odd was going on. And so my whole thing about it wasn't nearly like how you've described people you've met, Francis, and they'll probably be lambasting me like right now, for that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
So yes, it wasn't the end point for me. Sorry, it was the end point. It was like, okay, let's now look at this foundational thing. Not saying it wasn't foundational, but let's look at it. And then I found problematics from a skeptical point of view that just it almost went the same way as looking at the narratives at the beginning of the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. Suddenly the same kinds of contradictions there were here. And that then raised questions for me of what really happened, and therefore what really could have happened, possibly, and then obviously the ascension up behind a cloud. You tell that to anybody outside the faith, and they'll think, "Are you crazy?" In any sort of secular worldview. But no, that's what the Gospel of Luke says. I'm waiting for a debate on the ascension. I think that would be really fascinating one. Behind a cloud as historical. Nobody does that, but I thought, well, why not? It's just for some people.
The virgin birth.
And the virgin birth. Let's have a debate on both of them and focus on that. And I know it gets less evidence, but then it doesn't matter. The Bible's the word of God. It doesn't matter if it's one verse. Let's go for it. But anyway, that was interesting insight, Francis, on that.
Yeah. Well, but when we turn to archaeology, all these problems disappear, and the biblical account is supported, improved, and verified at every turn. That's our topic for today, anyway. What we're going to do is Andrew's been following this kind of online and debate. I guess it's more than online, on this curse tablet, which has been brought forward by some Christian scholars in America. So we're going to talk about that, and then it does fit into a sort of pattern. And then if there's time, we're going to move on to the 50 Arguments for God book that we've been following. And one of the chapters is just on archaeology. So we can do a kind of archaeology special over the whole episode. That's our thinking.
Okay.
I think this came about as tapping into archaeology and evangelical Christianity anyway. There's a big thing that's been going on for quite a while, and it's like every now and then you get something that's found, and then it's all over the news, all over the evangelical Christian news anyway, sometimes the secular news, and everything goes up in a storm. And it's all like in the meantime, the Bible's the word of God. It's accurate. We don't need anything. Sorry, something's happened on my computer here again. I'm having real technical problems today. All right, I'm going to do a pause here. Right, the Bible's the word of God, and we don't need any sort of external sort of support. And then all of a sudden, something's found, and then boom, you realize they really do want that external support. I don't know if you two have realized and seen that before. That's the way it looks. So as soon as there's an archaeological evidence for something, and we've had the famous St. James Ossuary, which turned out to have fake forged writing on it, the famous Mark fragment from the first century, arguing that it was from a first century gospel. And suddenly all these people come out and say, aha, you see, it is real. It is getting backed up. And so they really do want that evidence, which isn't there. It highlights that it's not been there. And then what happens, and this is what's happening again, it seems to me, with this recent curse tablet that's found, and we'll go into that evangelicals tend to jump onto it and put it all around the churches and all over the place before peer review and before the world's experts get onto it from whatever background. And it's often with egg on their face, embarrassment. And it looks like this has happened again.
I have to say, I hadn't heard of the curse tablet at all. It hadn't filtered its way through to my secular sources. So I had to look it all up when you and Ed started talking about it. But there was certainly a certain amount of really going for it with the curse tablet and its supposed significance. So perhaps we need to talk about, as it hadn't come through to me, perhaps we need to talk about what it was supposed to be, and what its significance was supposed to be in terms of supporting, I don't know, this, that, and the other. Amongst it being Moses being the author of of the Torah. I think it was one of the
yes,
supposed takeaways.
That's aspects of it as well. I think, Ed, you found that when you looked into it.
Yes, what I'll try and do is do a tiny bit of background, because if you're going to do most of the talking, Andrew, I guess.
Right. Okay. Yeah. On this particular one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So my memory is that it was a dig somewhere in the hills of Israel, and near a significant mountain from the point of view of the Bible text. And they found, they revisited the dig and went through the spoils of the original excavation of this community or whatever. And they found this curse tablet. Now,
well,
what the thing was,
they found sort of a bit of something, perhaps.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
A very tiny bit of something with some marks on it.
Yeah, so it's about half the size of a credit card. I remember that being said.
Very small,
it's a folded over piece of lead where you can't get inside of it without it all falling to bits. So apparently this is all fine. Writing on lead became a thing a few centuries later, if not at that time. And it had kind of marks and wobbles and scratches on it. And they put the thing through some new bit of high-tech scanning and got some marks and images they showed of the inside of the text of the folded lead that you couldn't see from the outside, and tried to suggest that this was some kind of writing. So we're talking about something dated around about 1200 BC, 1200 BC. That's the claim. Andrew, do you want to rescue me?
Yeah, I will. But with some not video clips, audio that is taken from video clips. So I'm going to play a section now that I put together.
Associates for Biblical Research is thrilled to announce the greatest archaeological discovery in our history, a lead curse tablet from an altar on Mount Ebal. Joshua 8:30 indicates an altar was built on this mountain of divine cursing. The 40 visible letters are written in an archaic Hebrew script, also known as Proto-Alphabetic. It is 200 to 400 years older than any Hebrew text ever found in Israel. Most remarkably, twice it reveals the personal divine name, Yahweh. This earth-shattering discovery will send shockwaves through the world of biblical scholarship.
Archaeologist Scott Stripling and a team from the Associates for Biblical Research uncovered the tablet in late 2019 and have began releasing their findings after nearly 3 years of painstaking research.
Many people are saying this is on a par with the Dead Sea Scrolls, this type of discovery.
Right.
I talked to someone yesterday who contacted me. He had been through Princeton and had been trained in the documentary hypothesis. And he said, I have to tell you, I'm rethinking everything I was taught at Princeton. This is older than Paleo-Hebrew. This predates Paleo-Hebrew. The ramifications of this are going to reverberate for generations.
Is there anything at all on it? Practically all epigraphers who have actually voiced their opinion on this agree that there's nothing there. There's simply no text at all.
There's nothing there. So there are so many problems with their methodology. You know, it's like, where do we begin? The first thing they did is they went out and announced this thing, and then they wouldn't show the pictures of that they finally released a year later. They had those pictures, but they didn't release them because they knew they'd just get laughed out of the room.
Most people in my field look at the photos, they look at the drawings, they see the claims, and they say, this is so ridiculous, I'm not going to dignify it by writing about it.
Wow.
That's a legitimate response.
It's going to state it up front as politely and as professionally and as academically as I can. There is no inscription there.
Okay, so that little piece of lead had to carry an awful lot on its shoulders. I mean, there's an awful lot there, isn't there, for something that when you unfold, I mean, is half the size of a credit card. Okay, maybe it's the size of a full credit card when you unfold it. I don't know.
Well-
It sounds like they got in over their skis, I think is the expression. You know, they got ahead of themselves.
Yeah, I
And
think
Ed?
the idea is that the text is supposed to be quite Hebrew-like, even in that early stage, and it's talking about Yahweh as a clear character who is associated with that site. So I think those are the things that they're trying to join the dots over, and so showing that the Bible is accurate way before any time when anyone else is, when the normal scholarship is saying the Bible's kind of attached to history, which is sort of like David onwards.
I mean, could either of you see anything in the images? I mean, if people go to that Cargill, to follow what Cargill is saying, it's very visual, and he's dealing a lot with the images and showing how they don't, it doesn't, you know, what he's trying to claim about them just doesn't match up with what he has himself produced. But looking at those images, could you see anything in what Stripling was claiming to see?
Well, I think the video, sorry, there were videos actually, but the audio clips that we just heard, sort of giving the to and the fro, really show the issue here that there's a lot at stake in either way. But I think that what's happening here is that they've jumped the sort of more fundamentalist Christian side of sort of given away the clear bias in this, really, because one side was clearly already talking about the fact of the ancient the documentary hypothesis is going to be that the Torah was written so much later and it's got different sources. They're clearly talking about the idea of Yahweh's name is found here with El, I think, and these were always separate from their different sources from the 7th century or 6th century. Now we're talking about what they believe is 12th century writing where they're put together. So for them, and they've been banding this about in Christian media for a long time, even before the peer review, that this is the implications of this tablet. Is very, very big, and yet we get all the way to the point that when they actually do reveal the photographs, the experts say some of them, there is nothing there. They are simply just the marks of a bit of lead bandied about in this place, and they're trying to see. It's like that phrase that I've heard several times. You probably heard it, I think. Wonderful things in the Bible I see, some put there by you, some put there by me. And I just to say this is the same thing with archaeology. Wonderful thing in this little Tony lead tablet I see. You know, nothing seen by you and everything seen by me. You know, so it's and so that's a surprise right there, because I would have thought before you can start talking about this is incredible significance on the dating of the Old Testament and have we got it wrong, which is a fine thing to have if it's really true, but to have experts say I see one or two, like in the audios there was the guy called Ralston who's Sean McDowel, and he's an expert, Christopher Ralston. He said he wouldn't go as far as saying there's nothing there, but he knows his colleagues say there's nothing there. So when you get that, and then you have these other people saying the documentary hypothesis, the Bible is accurate, and that's out the window. We know it's all true. It's incredible that can be got to that level before the peer review or just even now, right now. It's split. It's like two different worlds, and a new science for them, and secular or liberal colleges can have their own science of archaeology. That's what it seems to be saying to me.
I mean, Ralston was pretty harsh. He said, it's not that I'm unconvinced by the evidence. The evidence just isn't there. You know, there just isn't any evidence to be convinced by, so, which, you know, coming from Christian,
definitely Christian in the
side of the fence, you know, is pretty damning.
Totally, and a lot of Christian people who are scholarship, you know, absolutely are saying this, and I find it absolutely amazing that the people can be talking about, but if Yahweh that's there means this, and some people are saying, well, Yahweh isn't even there. You know, some people would say that, and the word Yahweh isn't even there, and it's like, so what if, and then the other, Ralston said, even if it was there, there's all these reasons why it doesn't mean what they think it means, you know. And so then you're going to get people accusing bias of either way. Oh, you secular liberals, you just want to destroy the truth of the Bible, and they plant the villain that side. And then
I can see it that way. How I see it is that that they've had a head start by announcing this thing a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. And we've all been waiting. So in that whole year, they've been speaking from the pulpit of this amazing new discovery. And then they're now the message now is, look, it's been peer reviewed, but of course all the atheist scholars are going bananas and don't know what to do and are just scoffing because they can't face the truth. And the people in the pew who aren't going to be looking at both sides and looking at the images and considering it for themselves are going to be completely strung along by this.
And so the only way into that is my usual way, which was sit back and watch the Christian self-destruct with each other. Until they say, oh, well, you're not the right type of Christian, then you're obviously a liberal. You know what I mean? And suddenly it's like, because Ralston and Cargill was an evangelical years ago, but I don't think he's a Christian now through his own journey. But these people have gone through expert 30, 40 years of paleography, if that's the word, and sort of reading inscriptions and everything else. And I thought, when I looked at it, I thought, well, what do I know? I see something like I see every day, knocked about bits of stone and stuff, looking at it. But I immediately thought, well, what do I know? I don't know what letters are and look like, and so I can't even see hardly anything on the tablets of the real ones. But when you get their diagrams, as Cargill shows, there's these up to 48 letters. But even the group are split because one of them sees 48 and the others see less. And so hang around. That's not the way you're presenting it. But now one of them on the new team that are going forward on this has dropped or not using one of the other people because they didn't agree on exactly what was on there. So I have read several places now.
So can we compare it with the hoo-ha over the early mark? Found it, was it in the masks, reused paper on masks?
You mean the mark fragment controversy?
Yes, that's right.
Controversy. Yeah, that was very similar in the sense of the that came out in a Bart Ehrman debate where someone called Daniel Wallace did a similar thing before it was peer reviewed and came all out. He suddenly said, Ehrman said, well, our earliest form of mark is the 2nd century fragment. He goes, no, it's not. It's this, suddenly blew the audience away. And he said, Bart Ehrman said he didn't know about that yet. So can you tell me more? And he said, well, I'm not at liberty to say anything more until, it comes out in whatever, but I can tell you there's this 1st century mark. And that was a huge mistake because when it all finally came out, it turned out to be
5 years later or something.
Yeah,
I remember people waiting. Yeah,
So and that was a huge problem in the method in which and then I went and researched that and saw videos of Christians and they were saying, we've done it, we've shown them that we knew that Mark, and somehow all of this stuff so encourages them that they go, they're almost admitting that before they didn't really have the support they wanted, whilst arguing that they didn't need the support, and now they do. So it's really funny. It's like now we could admit we had some problems, and now we've got 1st century mark. Then they found out that the whole thing was dated wrong, and that the experts that looked at it finally, when they did get together, realized that it wasn't a forgery. I don't think, as far as I remember, it was just much later and not at all what they thought was a 1st century mark fragment. And suddenly all of that encouragement to all of those evangelical audiences was just embarrassing to find out, or they'd just forgotten by now, and this is similar. All of those people out there are being hoodwinked about what this cursed tablet says, which is actually not a lot. It's you are cursed by God, Yahweh, cursed. You will die cursed. Cursed you will surely die. Cursed you are by Yahweh, cursed. Not exactly the most encouraging words you would want to find. To relate
it's
to
ironic,
people.
Really.
It is ironic, isn't it? And what we might as well say what we were talking about off the before the recording, Ed, about this.
Yes, that's right. That you can't have your cake and eat it. Either you're going to use something that puts God in the most horrible light, or you're going to have some lovely archaeology that supports the text of the Old Testament. But it seems to be you can't have both.
Exactly. And although I have heard people trying to do this, because I've heard people say, well, this sounds a bit harsh. What's going on here? And they say, well, cursed cursed from the covenant, and just all made it so that you know how people deal with slavery and all the rest of them, you know, and the genocide. So did it in the same way. They said, you know, so you might as well have come out by saying Yahweh loves you, basically. You know, so, you know, and in a roundabout way. But then anybody, yeah, I mean, it's the language of the Old Testament. There's a lot of cursings going on in Deuteronomy and in Joshua and things like that. And so it is the culture of the day to have God curse you. So anyway, I just found that I always find that very interesting. That do you really want to find stuff that supports stuff that you in another angle saying this was the way that they spoke about God, but God isn't really like that. And now you've got something that, okay, so it might show you that Moses existed, or Moses could, I mean, they were saying that now we know that they could have written the whole of the Old Testament back in the 12th century. Some people were saying that about this by 4 words, you know, 4 essential words. And it's like, wow, but do you really want to back up the moral things that Moses did in killing all these people? And you know, do you really want to find the support for the all those Canaanite villages? Because they're saying this supports the Exodus and it supports the early date for the Exodus. So all of those things in the Exodus and the firstborn dying is all being supported, and the other people are probably going that even who's the guy that does the moral monster thing?
Copan.
Copan is probably going, no, don't say that. I've done a whole book trying to make out that this trying to take advantage of the fact that we don't get quite the support for the Canaanite genocides that historically, and that's kind of advantageous for God's character. So as soon as I first heard about this, that was my first thought. Not that does this mean anything? It goes, oh my gosh, so God was like that. You know, and it was a cursing kind of God. And you don't really get that in your church. I mean, when you were at church, did you get people say people were cursed by God? Was that going around?
No, but in the Old Testament, it doesn't happen. It's God who does the cursing, isn't it?
Well, that's what I meant. But did you get the idea that God curses today in the teaching?
No.
And therefore, we've kind of removed that language from church, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
In a way, yes, exactly. So God
used Paul cursed somebody in one of the letters.
Yeah. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. It's just that.
But it's very unusual in the Bible for humans to be doing curses and it being considered a good thing.
That's right. And God cursing you normally had the devil doing the bad stuff by the time you get to charismatic churches rather than God's doing it. Although there was a guy called Derek Prince going around saying that God still curses and stuff today, and that some of us are all intertwined with that. But that's by and by. But in terms of this, I think the wording was real shocking to what does that mean? What does that say about God anyway? But it looks like there could be nothing there, and this was just a simple lead thing of 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters that they're trying to find something, as Cargill says.
It's like looking at the moon and seeing a face.
Exactly.
That's the man in the moon.
And if that's supported something by saying, you know, the man in the moon, and that's right. And we are pattern seeking creatures, so you would try to look at this and say, oh, that looks like a face, or like you saw a stick man, didn't you?
I could see a stick man.
You could stick man, but
I could see that stick man.
But that could be because we're so ingrained with what stick men are. Yeah, everything else is a bit funny. It's like little inspiring philosophy. One of the apologists out there, quite big on YouTube, he just said it just most of them just look like normal dents in any lead that you could see, you know. And that's so he was dismissing it instantly as an apologist, and I thought, well, okay, so just let the Christian people just dismantle this, and everyone else can just sit and not dignify it with a peer review response, because it's like Dawkins talking to a young earth creationist, you know what I mean? It's dignifying them by having the debate. This is not worthy of people to say, oh my gosh, we need to reevaluate now the entire documentary hypothesis. No bad thing if evidence came, if you are truly based on evidence.
I want to briefly talk about the wider archaeology of the Exodus and the conquest and all that part of the Bible.
Yeah.
Because I would have thought when you look at archaeology, the overall conclusion from archaeology only is very, very strong and clear. And that is that the Exodus and conquest didn't even remotely happen anything like as described in the first books of the Bible.
That is the case from my understanding, that the world's experts across the board in those areas would say that there is no, we have mentioned this before, I think, in the podcast, but there's no, basically the consensus I would say is that what you read in the Old Testament, it didn't happen that way.
Yeah. And if we're trying to do an episode on archaeology in the Bible, that's one of the few things which is actually very, very clear cut from my point of view.
From people are so-called maximalists and minimalists. They're people in archaeology who sort of go with the maximal story of the Bible, I think is one way to put it, and those that go with the minimal, you know. But even with Bible in the hand, people have gone away thinking, we can't find that. We just can't find what we, you know, and then so much so that some people say, well, there was one guy the other day, apologist, was saying, well, we shouldn't really expect to find anything in the desert, you know. Really, with 2 million people, with women and children and all the pets, for 40 years in a very short area, realistically, that nothing would be found, and not to expect it. And yet look what they do when you do find something. They would jump over the moon if you found a chariot wheel in the Red Sea, which
well, that's one of the things, isn't it?
That's right.
I still hear people claiming that that's the thing.
Yeah, but that they find it in the Red Sea, I think, when it's actually the Reed Sea for starters, because that's one of the famous things of the Bible.
Well, the whole thing's been completely discredited, but
it's been
it's still talked about.
They're still talked about, and this is the thing. What happens is that I still come across people that say you found, but they found chariot wheels, you know, or whatever, and so that suddenly settles it. It's like one thing wipes. Even if one thing was true, that shouldn't necessarily wipe something off the board necessarily. But like this curse tablet was meant to wipe the documentary apostles off the board. But someone might say, well, you know, we found this word Yahweh over here, and we found this over here and this over here, and have a more nuanced view. Very rarely do things get totally overturned. Although the famous one about evolution would be a rabbit's foot found in the Cambrian would do it. So that's an example of a possibility. That's not happened yet. But dinosaur footprints is another one that everyone was saying, isn't it?
Should we move on to the 50 Arguments for God book chapter on archaeology?
Yeah.
And my understanding of it is that it picks up a few things, and where there is an argument, all it is that the author of some of the New Testament books did indeed have some knowledge of the locations and politics and maybe some administrative characters who were the setting was correct. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, yeah. I think so. It doesn't really get you terribly far. I think, unfortunately, from the apologists' perspective, finding something that's consistent with the Bible isn't really getting you any further. It doesn't prove the rest of the Bible. I mean, you can have a number of things that are consistent with the Bible, and I think the comparison that's often made is Harry Potter, and that there are references to London, and there are things that are right about London, descriptions
King's
of
Cross
London
Station.
Yes, that's right. Well, not obviously platform 13 3/4, but there is
not that people have gone there to see.
There is for sure King's Cross Station, but so what? I mean, it as I said, unfortunately, from their point of view, anything that's inconsistent will always undermine, but things that are consistent are sort of like, it doesn't really significantly add to your case that this book talks about things that did exist. One would expect a few facts to be right, at least, in any book.
But I've always thought about that a bit like the James Cameron Titanic movie. I mean, that movie, in terms of the ship and its design and where the kitchens were and the hallways and the decor and the band and playing and all these things that can be delved up from history, and even the physical evidence, was so accurate, it's unbelievable. But intertwined with that is a complete fictional story. Suddenly you've got, so you say, well, that kitchen, it was 4 meters from the side door. Those stairs did wind up left. that's amazing. So Kate and Leo, well, where's the board they were on? You know, do you know what I mean? So that's the link that I see as the problem. It's like, you know, even Spider-Man swung between the two towers in New York at the time of some of the earlier films. So, you know, so you can't link historical accuracy in terms of geography necessarily with the actual story either. Just the setting is accurate. So
yeah.
In these cases, so.
And it is very thin gruel, so it makes you wonder, you know, if that's the best you've got, there really isn't anything in archaeology that does back up the Bible in any way that is even slightly arresting.
Yes, I mean, it's a bit hard to imagine what archaeological finds there could be that really would be significant in terms of proving the truth of the Christian narrative. Can you think of what can you think of that somebody might find in archaeological terms that make you think, oh wow, yeah, that
I can think of the Shroud of Turin for many people.
Well,
going back to the one referenced in John, and they folded over it. That they would say, well, that's come all the way down with its mystery, and there we go, right back to the you know, to that particular episode recorded in the Gospel of John. Yeah, and that would be if it were, but there's so much dispute about that. And what would that mean anyway? I mean, it could mean that Jesus was quickly buried there and taken away anyway by someone. That's even then, it doesn't. Although I suppose they're trying to argue that that's, I don't know, something to do with
I suppose it would mean more, you know, you would have to account for how does it come about that there is this image, you know, what
yes, that's right.
That there's this image on this piece of cloth. So it's a bit more than that. But
that's the ascension, or not the resurrection.
Shroud of Turin, to be honest, is quite interesting, and it's always one of those things that sort of dances, just not, you know, always not quite within sight. So I've never found anything that absolutely nails it down as a forgery, but equally there's never anything that quite nails it down as you know, as being credible. I mean, I know there were the carbon tests, but
yes, that's right, 15th century
there are challenges to the carbon tests.
I
mean, I'm not saying I disbelieve them, I'm just saying that for everything you've got like that, there are some contrary, you know, there are always a few arguments you can make on the other side for the Shroud of Turin, and that is why I find it quite an interesting you know, quite an interesting thing to think about, because I think that it's not something that you can necessarily completely dismiss, because, well, like I said, there are always a few arguments. I'm not saying I do believe that it is what they say it is, but I'm just saying that they do have a bit of an argument on some of those things. But I don't know if that counts as archaeology.
They do apologetic, not apologetic things, but, you know, you get things like, well, they did the carbon test on 2 places, so I read, and it took it back to the 15th century. So that side say, well, that settles it. Then the others come back and say, you did it on repaired cloth, which was done in the 15th century. So now they won't let you do it on the others because you need to preserve it. And this goes on and on and on, this kind of thing. And so suddenly it becomes this mystery event, which then you're going to have 2 camps. It does go back. Or somebody could be a middle camp. Maybe it is something. It doesn't go back to Jesus. Somebody else. It was somebody else. The link to Jesus is just, I don't know where the history evidence comes for that. In terms of you must have had a chain of it being passed down or something with the verbal and then written versions of, yes, we've handed this down, we were given this, and it goes all the way back. But it strikes me as a bizarre thing to prove anything in just purely because of the controversy, you know. Otherwise, we'd say, right, how do you deal with the Turin shroud? And you go, oh, that's a real hard one. That's the hardest one. Yeah. So
I want to go back to the book chapter on archaeology, because they are making more claims than just what could possibly be in archaeology to confirm the Bible. So it's hardly worth talking about, which is what we imagine would be maybe the more honest approach. They said that many of the recorded events occurred and have enhanced the credibility of the biblical record of both the Old and New Testament periods. So that's what they're claiming about archaeological discoveries, that they have enhanced the credibility of the biblical record. And then say they were talking about Luke writing about things in Acts, and so they conclude all that by saying, thus the accuracy of Luke's account in Acts is confirmed and illustrated. And as we say, it's the kind of Spider-Man or Harry Potter kind of line of argument.
I mean, there might be something to say that the accuracy of the setting, if say people but before that were saying, well, not even the setting is accurate, they've got this, it's an anachronistic, all of this is going on, and then somebody finds something and it goes, oh my gosh, so there is the pool of Siloam or whatever, and then, you know, if that's gone on prior, then that would be very encouraging for the believing side, if you like, to go, well, if the setting is accurate, then at least you've got the stage. The stage isn't fictional, you know. So it's like so what about, could the story have played out there, which and then is the story that's come through oral tradition got something to it, kernels of truth maybe, or whole cloth fiction is put into the setting. So you're still going to have those discussions, but you know, it's looking better if the stage is historical, so to speak, you know.
I mean, I don't know whether we've got time to go into this, but interestingly, in this chapter, there's a section on rolling stones at tombs, which initially sounds like there was some kind of rock concert going on. But disappointingly, turns out
I didn't think they were that old, but there you go.
Yes, they just look that old.
that really is pushing it. But wow, what a thought! And playing back there in the tombs.
But I mean, he specifically relies on the fact that stones are found that are rolled across the mouth of tombs, and yet you and Andrew and you and Ed have found stuff about how that really wasn't what the usual stone was like. It wasn't something that you rolled across. It was more like a plug. It was a bit like a champagne plug, in that it had a bit that fitted into the hole, and then a bit that sort of projected over the
like
hole.
A flange.
Yes. So you know, they couldn't be easily rolled, and this causes all sorts of problems. And contrary to what he says, many tombs from the time of Christ have been discovered. It says some of them still have these rolling stones. Well, yeah, but it sounds like not many of them had that type of stone, which is pretty much inconsistent with what the Bible describes. But you know,
exactly.
Yeah. So
and if later stones were commented on as having rolling stones, so to speak, that you could roll away, then that would be what's the word?
Anachronism.
Yes,
and therefore that could be, which is where you were going with that, Ed, weren't you?
Yes, actually, I've read back on that, because what I like to do with these things is to post them to the Unbelievable discussion group on Facebook.
Sticks, yeah.
And see how it sticks. And actually, that was one of the things when I started talking about this that I realised it's not a very good way of describing it. I can come on to that actually, but the if we kind of get the big picture first.
Yeah.
So I find it ironic that of the two of the about six things that they choose to speak about in this chapter, one's about the rolling stones at tombs, the other one's the tomb of Caiaphas. They're both, to me, are good bits of evidence in combination to suggest that the whole tomb account for Jesus is a later legend. Now, we talked about this in relation to Robin Walsh, who came up with, I think, 30 or 35 or something accounts from in the ancient world, more the Greek and Roman than the Hebrew for sure, of it being a trope of some significant character. After they've died, their tomb is found suddenly to be empty. And this is a way of talking about the importance of the person. And that trope is what Mark does. He's the first person in the whole of the New Testament to talk about the tomb. Paul mentions burial, but doesn't mention whether it's a tomb or a grave. And then Mark comes along in about AD 70 and mentions this whole tomb story, and then it looks like the other gospel writers, well, certainly the synoptic gospel writers, Luke and Matthew, are using his material, and scholarship now is drifting towards that John definitely was well aware of the other
Yeah, it does
gospels
seem to be,
when he
yeah.
wrote. Yeah. So we could say that the whole thing is really resting on Mark. Okay, so can I go on now to back to this whole thing with Rolling Stones?
Yeah.
So this is just not one. This is just one of other reasons why we should think that the tomb account is legendary. That the tomb has a Rolling Stone, but it also is just a normal, well, an elite person's tomb. It's not even Caiaphas, and Caiaphas's tomb did not have a Rolling Stone. He wasn't rich enough for that. It's just the really mega rich people that are the kinds that the book mentions. Queen Helena of Adiabene has a tomb there, and then there's the tomb of the family of Herod the Great. So those are the kind of ultra elites who are rich enough to have Rolling Stone tombs. There's a Christian believer archaeologist who's written about this in the Biblical Archaeology journal, and then another archaeologist Christian who wrote us a response as well. And in that it says that there were only 4 tombs before the destruction of Jerusalem that were these Rolling Stone tombs, and the others were the plug kinds that Francis was talking about, and that's what makes it what Andrew called anachronistic. But
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say in case anybody might not be clear about this, that I don't know about other people, but I've always had in my head the idea that the stone that was rolled over was like a massive cannonball. So, that it was spherical. That's how I've always pictured it. But it turns out this was news to me. Obviously, the two of you had a better understanding of this, but I'm going to say this for those who might have been misled by, like me, misleading themselves, that it turns out that the Rolling Stone was a disc that emerged from between to like a slice, so it could be rolled out or rolled back into its little compartment. So it wasn't something that was, so that's why, obviously, because that's quite a sophisticated piece of kit in terms of stones and caves, that you've got to carve this niche, and then you've got to carve this circular thing that will fit into the niche and then can be rolled out from the niche to cover the whole of the tomb. So that's why it would be restricted to the better off people and not for the hoi polloi. Yeah. Or hoi polloi, as my husband would say. Really, yes. He gets annoyed by people saying the hoi polloi, which apparently is not right.
Well, even Caiaphas, who's the boss of Joseph of Arimathea, according to the narrative, he doesn't get one of these Rolling Stone tombs for his family. And the tomb as well is described, I think Mary can see what's inside just by appearing in the entrance. And that would make it quite a simple tomb. And these are kind of ultra elite tombs like Queen Helena's and everything have much more kind of corridors and side porticos and things like that, where you wouldn't be able to see simply from the entrance. So there's a bit of a kind of mismatch. It's sort of a normal elite person's tomb for the most of the descriptions, but the Rolling Stone would suggest it's a super elite tomb. And then, of course, the hoi polloi don't get rock-hewn tombs in any way at all. That they're buried.
Yeah.
You can see how, though, in those that think, say, Robin Walsh and others that think, even Bart Ehrman now, I think that the tomb was an invention later, how, in fact, such a great kind of tomb would serve as a symbol, because it's not like a ditch or some kind of thing where people can just easily slip by. The very fact that the tomb is empty, it's kind of dramatic. Whether in fact one gospel has it, and it does seem to me that Mark, it's already rolled away. So does that mean that Jesus walked out before they got there? And then the other one, the angel seems to come down in front of the women, in front of the guards, and rolled it away to see that he wasn't there, meaning somehow he's gone through the wall. Either way, it's still dramatic to see and to talk of an empty tomb, doesn't it? It brings it down to the principle of what you're trying to communicate. So I can see how powerful that is just as story. In itself, rather than everybody on the cross had somebody that threw them into this style of tomb, because it does seem to be, if it was an actual tomb like that, it's a rarity, isn't it?
The Rolling Stone tombs, there were 4, or somebody in my Facebook discussions tried to link me to something or mention something that said there were 6. But there's that small number, and then there's many of them, maybe 100 or something, which have been discovered in the period after the fall of Jerusalem.
Right,
and that's why I'm saying it's not anachronistic, because if we're thinking that Mark wrote in AD 70, he's not aware of all these tombs that later appeared all around Palestine that were more like the one described in his story. He's just sort of getting it wrong. He's just not aware of local custom in this case. Right.
The thing that I found quite amusing in the article that I guess we're going to link to in the show notes about from the Christian about the rolling stones, or the plug-shaped stones, was how he was quite concerned about how it would be difficult for an angel to sit on a round rolling stone, whereas it'd be much easier for them to sit on a more of a square boulder. And it did call to mind, the discussions they used to have about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I mean is it how difficult is it for an angel to sit on a round disc shaped as opposed to a square topped boulder?
That is bizarre. That's a bit, that famous story about some girl seeing 3 fairies at the bottom of the garden. That famous
yes.
Yeah,
it was 2 of them, wasn't it?
That's
a Cottingley fairies, right?
That's a little bit like saying yes, but would they have disturbed the grass if they were just there, and is the garden wide enough for them? You know what I mean? It's just it's sort of begging the question. Hang on, you're talking about an angel here. What? Already you're into another sphere of another kind of being with assumptions of no problem, and then you're saying, well, I think actually it must have been this kind of stone to sit on. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it is bizarre at that level. It's even for us to read, say this not long after that, the Ascension, when two Jesus disappeared off and went behind a cloud, and then 2 angels or men in bright or whatever appeared to them. That seemed to be no problem that these 2 people came out and said, oh, he'll come back in the same way. I'd take a double take and say, now from our perspective, wouldn't we? Who are you? You look a bit different than most humans. So it sort of begs the question of what we're assuming is normal here. The supernatural mix of the natural, these stories. The same with the tomb and the empty tomb and going through it or not. Have you ever thought about that, Ed, about whether Jesus was meant to have gone through it before it was opened or came out because it was opened?
Well, he walked through walls later in Luke's account. So I assumed he just sort of like Mark's version.
Well, I think when I've sort of raised this in our discussion group with Christians, the response was, well, I think it's sort of not an invalid response, which was that the purpose of the empty tomb was not to let Jesus out, but to let witnesses in, so they could see
that's
it
that
was
drama
empty.
story again I was bringing up.
Yeah.
It's very easy to see how it's a symbolic. It's very useful to have something, even if you're saying it's historical. It's better to say, well, you see that ditch over there, there was a little mound and he was under there clearly and he's walked out. That's not nearly as powerful as saying there's this stone tomb and it's rolled away, go in and have a look, he's gone.
Yes,
that's quite something.
I think it's Bart Ehrman who says that it was kind of retrofitted, that people reasoned, well, if Jesus was there in the flesh and that was his fleshly body, then his tomb must have been empty. Okay, so let's just make that point by providing an illustration of how people would have found his tomb was empty.
Exactly. And the same with the ascension. It's like, if he's died and he's not going to die, where's he going to be? In a little tent somewhere outside Jerusalem for the rest of ever? Or, well, okay, we'll have him go up but he's physically here, but heaven we can't see. I'll tell you what, we'll have him go up and disappear behind a cloud. It's obvious you could see someone's going to say, we need a story like that. It's almost like film directors saying, I need a better ending than this. Okay, make him go up and go behind a cloud and disappear, and then don't ask any more questions, because otherwise people will be looking for him. Do you know what I
mean? Yeah.
And it's like, and so I know he's gone up into heaven, which you can't see and necessarily prove, but it's like, that's why I want to debate on the ascension, to get these big eggheads around on either side and say, did he rise up in front of 8 people and disappear behind a cloud? Let's have the debate right now, historical or not. But it never happens. It's like, that's you can probably see why it never happens, but it seems to be respectable to talk about the empty tomb or not, but not so. I bet William Lane Craig wouldn't do an ascension debate, in the same manner.
What I ask occasionally is, what was Jesus doing between the appearances? Was he ascended to heaven and came down from heaven to appear to people, or was he hiding in the woods or in the tent or whatever you said?
Or just to sort of get some other clothes on. Looks like the gardener. Because the two stories almost don't tally. The empty tomb would suggest that it was like Lazarus in John's Gospel, 4 nights in the tomb and then raised and then carried on living, and he was a kind of character that carried on for a chapter or two. So he was back alive and eating and living with people all the time. Or was it like the appearances story you get in the first creed quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 of Jesus, and also the hymn in Philippians 2 of Jesus on Easter morning rising to heaven and then appearing to people thereafter. And Paul's experience on the Damascus Road was Jesus appearing to him from heaven. It was way after any ascension. And he equated that exactly to the appearances to Peter and the disciples. It gives you visionary experiences. And like I said, you'd have to say, because isn't this a 90-mile walk to Galilee? So in Mark and Matthew, you've said, I'm going ahead of you to Galilee. Does that mean he's like hitchhiking? Do you know what I mean? You have to think about it.
Yeah.
I've always thought about
I think it's like a Star Trek transporter. He could just transport himself.
Well, okay, so you've got like Philip in Acts suddenly from A to B.
Philip
so the tedious business of actually traveling,
and it's like,
in 3 dimensions to get there.
With a load of no wonder some of them doubted, load of disgruntled disciples saying, we've got to walk. And it's like, you're all right, you can transport here, there, and that's why they say you could get back to Jerusalem quickly to go back and make those appearances, and so disciples seem to be going around normally, it seems to me. So it's full of this ties into the doubting tradition, like I mentioned in my own.
We've come full circle.
And there's enough to doubt. But in terms of pinning it back to archaeology, then and that story as well, it's like the resurrection has been argued for the archaeological argument, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, thank you again for highlighting this curse tablet. I don't know what should we call it? Debate.
Yes.
And it's how it fits in with other similar debacles, you could say, over the Mark fragment and all that sort of thing. and the big picture of archaeology failing to support the Bible in any meaningful way in terms of its reliability in the narrative. And then even when there's a chapter on it in its Evidence for God, in the Evidence for God book, we find that that it's either neutral, or when you dig deeper, the archaeology, even the stuff that they have as their top drawer examples to talk about, undermine the credibility of the Bible.
Yes, I suppose I would just add to that for my bit for this episode on that. It's that you have to we all have to obviously watch for our own biases, basically. And obviously these testimonies of the James ossuary, the Mark fragment, and now the curse tablet is jumping the gun. Too much excitement to prove your particular stance already, which is already a theological belief, that you have a theological belief that cannot be wrong, and there we need evidence to support it. And sometimes the danger is almost seeing evidence to support it where other eyes don't see it. And this is a clear case on this last one. Other eyes are not seeing the evidence you're seeing, which is worrying. And jumping the gun before proper peer review, and then let's just let Christians look at it first. All persuasions of Christians. When you've got your story straight, then go to the world with a peer review, and you wouldn't have this embarrassment. You'd have people say, no, I'd love to believe it, and it would be wonderful if we could find, Jesus' actual tomb, his actual thing, and everything else is there. And everybody can look and go, oh my gosh, we're now history deniers if we don't follow this, but it's not working out like that. With the Exodus, with the conquests, with so much from then right till Jesus' time, it's not working out. And the best you can get often is the setting is accurate. But that's it. It seems to be the setting is accurate, not necessarily proof of the stories played out in the New Testament or the Old Testament. And in fact, a lot that would say that the stories never played out like that, and a lot more different things were happening in reality that we need to probably pursue and accept. So that would be my wording for it.
I've got a nice little thing to finish off with, that tying beginning and end. The resurrection is in the heart, in the eye of the beholder.
Yes. Yes,
that's interesting. Yeah.
Or like that thing, I'll just do it again. Some wonderful things in the Bible I see, some put there by you and some put there by me. So that's I remember that from years ago. So anyway, until I hope you've enjoyed this episode in the archaeological realm, and look forward to doing the next episode with you both. So I have been your host, Andrew.
I've been Francis.
And I'm Ed. Thank you and goodbye.